A few years ago, South Korea was primarily known for Samsung phones and Hyundai cars. But in 2022, something seismic shifted in global defense markets. Poland, a nation bordering Russia, needed weapons fast. They didn't call Washington. They didn't contact Paris or Berlin. They picked up the phone and called Seoul. And what happened next stunned the entire defense industry. Poland signed a $22 billion deal with South Korea. Not just any deal, the largest arms export contract in South Korean history. Within months, K2 tanks started rolling off Korean production lines and shipping across the world. K9 howitzers followed, then FA-50 fighter jets. By 2024, South Korea had skyrocketed into the ranks of the world's top 10 arms exporters. Today, they're competing directly with Germany, France, and Britain, nations that have been in the weapons business for over a century. Let's rewind to understand how we got here. South Korea wasn't always a defense superpower. In fact, if you'd asked military strategists in 2015 where the next revolution in global weapons manufacturing would come from, South Korea wouldn't have made the short list. Back then, the country's defense exports hovered around $2 to $3 billion annually. Not terrible, but hardly remarkable. For over 70 years, South Korea has lived in a state of constant military tension. That peninsula is the most heavily militarized border on Earth. North Korea's nuclear arsenal and intercontinental ballistic missiles mean Seoul can't afford to play defense casually. This existential pressure forced South Korea to develop a comprehensive, domestically integrated military-industrial complex. They couldn't rely on imports. They couldn't depend on foreign suppliers. They had to build everything themselves. Unlike European nations that outsourced parts of their defense manufacturing after the Cold War, South Korea maintained an entire ecosystem. Hanwha, Hyundai Rotem, LIG Next One, and Korea Aerospace Industries, the so-called K-Defense Big Four, kept their production lines running, their engineers sharp, and their supply chains domestic. When demand exploded, they weren't caught off guard. And demand did explode. In 2021, South Korean arms exports surged to $7.3 billion. By 2022, they reached $17.3 billion. In 2024, the K-Defense Big Four alone generated $14.1 billion in revenue, a staggering 31% increase in a single year. Today, South Korea ranks 10th globally in arms exports and supplies weapons to over 40 countries across every continent. The question everyone is asking is, how did they pull this off so fast? When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, European nations panicked. Poland, Estonia, Romania, and Lithuania, countries on Russia's doorstep, looked around and realized their arsenals were dangerously depleted. They needed weapons immediately. Not in 5 years, not in 2, now. They turned to America and Germany, the traditional suppliers. But here's what happened. The US and European defense contractors were drowning in orders. American weapons manufacturers, already stretched supplying Ukraine and Israel, couldn't fulfill new orders quickly. German defense companies faced supply chain bottlenecks. France was backlogged. Britain was overwhelmed. South Korea? They had supplies. Here's why. For decades, South Korea invested heavily in artillery, tanks, and self-propelled howitzers, the exact weapons Ukraine desperately needed. The K9 Thunder, South Korea's flagship self-propelled howitzer, has been in production continuously since the 1990s. Factories were humming, supply chains were streamlined. When Poland came calling, Hanwha could respond with a delivery timeline that stunned Western competitors. Poland got 180 K2 tanks delivered in phases, starting immediately. Germany? It took years for German Leopard tanks to arrive. Poland got hundreds of K9 howitzers, while French Caesar systems were stuck in production queues. This wasn't just faster, it was dramatically, game-changingly faster. But speed was only part of the equation. Enter the second reason: money. Or rather, the lack of it. A French Caesar howitzer costs $7.5 million. A German PZH-2000 runs over $10 million. South Korea's K9 Thunder? Less than 4 million. The K2 tank, a world-class piece of armor comparable to the German Leopard 2A7, cost significantly less than its German counterpart. The Fa-50 light fighter jet, which shares 70% of its components with the American F-16, offers world-class combat performances at a fraction of the price. This wasn't cost-cutting at the expense of quality. South Korean weapons are genuinely advanced. The K9 Thunder fires at faster rates than the American Paladin. It has a greater range. Its automated systems are cutting edge. Military experts routinely describe it as one of the world's best self-propelled howitzers. The K2 tank incorporates smoothbore cannon technology and advanced fire control systems. The Fa-50 features modular avionics, precision targeting pods, and the ability to integrate advanced missile systems. Third reason, flexibility. Unlike the US, which maintains tight restrictions on overseas production and technology transfer, South Korea actively encourages licensing and local manufacturing. Poland? They're not just buying K2 tanks from Seoul, they're building them domestically. The production line is being established in Poland, giving them long-term independence and economic benefit. Same with Indian production of the K9 Vajra T, the Filipino variant of the Fa-50, and Egyptian plans to assemble Fa-50 jets locally. Poland is the anchor customer. They've absorbed roughly 46% of all South Korean arms exports in recent years. Why? Proximity to Russia, combined with cash availability and desperation. Sitting 400 kilometers from Moscow, Poland can't afford delays. South Korea delivers. Estonia, Lithuania, Romania, Latvia, and Slovakia, all Eastern European nations, have become voracious Korean weapons consumers. They share Poland's urgency and economic profile. Saudi Arabia is the second largest buyer, having purchased over $530 million in South Korean weapons in 2024 alone. The UAE has spent $145 million. Turkey, Israel, Iraq, and the entire region are adopting Korean systems. Why? Simple. They need weapons without American strings attached. US arms sales come with congressional oversight, human rights considerations, and political red tape. South Korean sales are faster, more flexible, and less encumbered by Western political concerns. Some nations, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, prefer having diverse supply chains rather than depending solely on American suppliers. South Korea offers that diversification. South Korean weapons are cheaper. But, and this is critical, they're not cheap in the way Russian weapons are cheap. They're cheap because of efficient manufacturing, streamlined supply chains, and the advantage of scale. The K9 is $4 million because Hanwha has been producing it since the 1990s and has optimized every aspect of manufacturing. That's different from being cheap because you cut corners. South Korea is becoming a military superpower without the strategic rivalries that come with American or Chinese weapons dominance. When a country buys American weapons, it's implicitly aligning with Washington's strategic vision. When they buy Chinese weapons, they're accepting Beijing's political influence. But South Korean weapons? They're strategically neutral. They come without ideological baggage. This is revolutionary. India buys from South Korea without abandoning its Russian relationships. The UAE buys from South Korea while maintaining American partnerships. Poland standardizes on Korean systems while remaining deeply embedded in NATO. There is no contradiction because South Korea doesn't demand ideological allegiance. Simultaneously, South Korea is filling a vacuum created by other suppliers. Russia's capacity has collapsed due to the Ukraine war needs. European manufacturers are capacity constrained. American production, while massive, is increasingly directed towards replacing depleted US stockpiles. South Korea stepped into the gap and is now indispensable. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in global defense procurement patterns. For the first time since World War II, a non-Western, non-European nation other than Russia and China has become a primary weapon supplier to democratic, NATO-aligned countries. The world is rearming, and increasingly, the arsenal of democracy carries a Made in Korea stamp. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.